what are some mistakes that businesses are making when it comes to that marketing? Is there any specific examples, or is what you just said exactly it?
Yeah, there's a lot of mistakes, and,
Okay,
and
fair.
I have definitely like talked about a couple of them. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I sort of touched on already, but I'll go deeper into it, that marketing teams and marketing individuals are making is doing random acts of marketing.
Hmm.
And it's because they have to be, or they feel like they have to be very reactionary. And what I mean by that is the minute the numbers are down or we're not hitting our growth targets, the sales team gets immense pressure on them.
Yeah.
They start to feel micromanaged because
Yeah.
their manager is panicking, the CEO is panicking. They turn to marketing. They're like, can you run a campaign? So what does marketing do? Marketing wants to be a team player. We want to help drive the revenue. That's what we're there for, is to support the growth of the organization. We run and put a campaign in place to start to capture leads, right? Then you have a sales rep that comes to you and says, hey, could you put together this custom presentation for me? I have a really big opportunity with 3M. I need to be spot on. If I do this, I will, more than double my numbers. This will help the revenue. Again, we want to be a team player. We drop everything. We go and we do that one-off ask for the sales rep. Then you have the CEO comes to you and is like, hey, have we ever thought about doing an article and such and such? And you do it. All of these things add up to a lot of marketing, but they're all disconnected.
Hmm.
And so there's no real strategy behind them. And what happens is the trade-off of doing these random acts of marketing is you're taking focus away from that strategy that you built out to achieve that long-term growth.
Wow.
And now everything's disconnected. And if you stop and think about it, it's like the marketing team worked their butts off, but they didn't help move the needle.
Mm.
And if they would have said politely no to some of these requests, or at least evaluated any request that came in and said, does this move the needle in the grand scheme of things? Does this support the strategy that we laid out? That's a long-term strategy to help this company, build that catalyst for growth. And if the answer is yes, we will do it. If the answer is no, we will politely decline and say, right now, this is our priority. I don't care if it's the CEO asking for
Mm.
it or the VP of sales or a sales rep. They will understand when the results start to come in that you were hyper focused, that you stuck to the plan and you did the things and you gave it the
Mm.
time that it needs. I think another big mistake that marketing teams often make, and again, it comes from the pressures that they're getting from within the organization, is a lack of patience. And I
Yeah.
always say lack of patience is a growth killer.
Mm.
And the reason I say that, if you look at building out a demand generation engine, for example, it takes time to build up all that content.
Mhm.
Essentially, what we recommend at Growth Mode Marketing to people is build your digital footprint to become your best sales rep.
Mm.
It doesn't mean it replaces the sales rep, but it
Sure.
means it helps them get through that 80% of the buying decision process before they're willing to engage with a company and have conversations with a sales rep. And to do that, it takes a lot of time. It also takes time to get traction. Like, you have to build your audience
Mm.
and they have to want to consume your content, which means
Yeah.
you have to continually put content in front of them. This podcast is a great example of, a component of demand generation. When you launch a podcast, you're not immediately going to have 5,000 listeners and people calling off the hook, like,
Yeah,
let's do business together. It's a long-term strategy.
exactly.
And people listen to it and they start to feel familiar with your brand and you. And over time, when that need comes up, they think of you and they have that conversation with you. The problem with many organizations is they put those things into place and they kind of stop and start,
Yeah.
because a few months in, they're like, we're not seeing results.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to the we need leads, we need them now.
Yeah.
And so these programs get abandoned. I mean, there's a reason that most podcasts that launch never go past 10 episodes,
Right.
right? And
Yep.
if you think 10 episodes is going to, change your business outcomes, it's probably not.
Yeah.
Unless
Yeah.
you're, one of the very, very few podcasts that takes off immediately.
Yeah.
And so if you don't put the time in and you don't go into it and educate internally, like, hey, this is a long-term strategy.
Mhm.
It's going to take 6 to 12 months to start to see results.
Yeah.
And 18 months in, it's going to be golden.
Yeah.
Like you have
Yeah.
to educate them. Otherwise, you're going to get those pressures. And you have to be willing to stand your ground on those things and say, it needs more time. It's
Yeah.
not realistic to expect it to produce in 3 months.